It was a cold winter night in 1995. Neil Perry is at home with his parents. They thought he was about to sleep in his room, and no one would have expected that he wouldn't be alive the next morning. Neil is a student at Welton Academy. He was intelligent, talented, and brought strong academic performances to the table. He had good friends and was also a member of the Dead Poets Society. It was a secret club where students gathered to read poetry, express themselves, and embrace the ideals of free thoughts and self-discovery inspired by their teacher, Mr. Keating. Neil also had a big passion for acting. He had lots of pressure due to his strict father. But things have changed when Neil plays the main role, Puck, in A Midsummer Night's Dream against his father's wishes. The teacher, John Keating, had a great relationship with Neil and gave him advice to handle his father's pressure. When Neil's role in the theater was over, he gained so much compliments as never before. Anyways, his father was angry and took him home. He threatens to send him to military school.
The house is dark and silent, everyone asleep except Neil. His bedroom door opens softly, almost soundlessly, as he slips out and makes his way down the hall. There is a chill in the air, a stillness that clings to the walls. He moves quietly, his bare feet padding along the cold floor toward his father's study. The room is filled with shadows, the faint outline of heavy furniture, his father's polished desk. He steps inside and pauses, looking at the familiar room, his expression calm but distant. The moonlight filters through a small window, casting an eerie glow across his face as he reaches for the revolver in the desk drawer. Neil sits down, his movements slow and deliberate. He raises the revolver, the metal glinting in the dim light, and closes his eyes, as if at peace. In that heavy silence, there is only a single sound, the final echo of the shot that shatters the stillness of the night. For the crime of this week, we have Todd Anderson in the studio. He is a famous poet of the 1970s, and your grandparents will know him. You probably heard about the poem A Cold Winter Night. And above all, he was a close friend to Neil Perry. Welcome, Mr. Anderson. How are you?
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
So, Mr. Anderson, my first question is about your famous poem, A Cold Winter Night. Was it dedicated to your deceased friend Neil Perry?
Yes, I wrote that poem 11 years after his death because it took a very long time to process losing my close friend.
Dear listeners, if you want to understand what we're talking about, you can read the poem online. Now let's talk about the person Neil Perry. What kind of person was he?
Well, looking back, I would describe Neil as one of the most inspiring and courageous people I have ever known. He was always optimistic, and he always had a way of igniting excitement in himself and others. Neil really knew what it meant to live bravely.
The reason why you came here today is Neil Perry's death. And what do you think was the main reason for this suicide?
Mr. Keating was fired because the school thought he was the reason Neil killed himself. But in reality, his suicide was caused by his father. His father didn't respect his decisions and tried to control his life. When Neil's father found out about his acting career, he removed him from Welton Academy and enrolled him in a military school. I believe that when Neil realized he had no control over his life anymore, he saw death as the only escape.
How horrible. I am speechless right now. I am very sorry for what you experienced. Speaking about his death, how much would you say that his death influenced your career? We just learned he was the reason you wrote your most famous poem.
Neil was always dedicated on following his dreams, and he never let something get in the way of his dreams. He prioritized his acting career over his father's wishes. But sadly, when his father took control over his life, Neil died for his dreams. His death was a wake-up call that showed me nothing is more important than pursuing your dreams. And look how far I've come now.
But he wasn't the only one who helped you achieving your goals, was he?
Yes, Mr. Keating, my former English teacher at Welton Academy, showed that there is no sense in waiting for an opportunity to come, but you have to search for an opportunity. He always said, "Carpe diem," which means seize the day, and I really lived by that phrase. And I definitely recommend our listeners to seize the day.
Well, Mr. Anderson, thank you for the interview. I think it helped us learning more about the character, and it helped us having a deeper understanding.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
To help us unpack Neil's story, I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Hartmann, a clinical psychologist specializing in adolescent mental health. Dr. Hartmann, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Luca. This is a deeply moving case that raises important questions.
Neil had all promise in the world, yet he felt so conflicted. How common is this intense family pressure, and what effects can it have?
It's sadly very common, especially in high-achieving environments. Adolescents, like Neil, are in a critical period of identity formation. Neil was torn between his father's demands and his own passion for acting, which created a sense of psychological entrapment, a feeling of having no real choice in shaping his life. That can lead to hopelessness.
So, Keating's message to seize the day, how did that affect him?
Keating introduced Neil to the idea that his life could be his own, which was empowering yet heightened to the contrast with his father's control. This new vision of freedom made Neil's internal conflict even harder to resolve.
It's heartbreaking to think Neil felt he had no escape. If he had had more support, might things have ended differently?
Absolutely. Open support from friends, family, or a counselor could have helped Neil navigate his feelings. Knowing he had someone in his corner could have given him the strength to assert his dreams.
And for those in Neil's situation, how can loved ones best offer that support?
Creating a safe, non-judgmental space is crucial. Encouraging someone to explore their true self and providing validation can make all the difference.
Thank you, Dr. Hartmann. This conversation truly highlights how crucial empathy and mental health support are.
This case is a great example of a kid with dreams, but without any support of his parents. Don't you think so, Luca?
I absolutely agree. It is very common these days that a lot of parents want their children to go to university and do not respect their dreams.
Thank you, listeners, for supporting us every week. Next week we will talk about another captivating story. Bye and take care of yourself.